So I posted it to my viewers in the community tab of whether or not I should cover Storypath Ultra. Everyone said yes, so here it is. If you want to decide if Storypath Ultra is for you, now is the time to watch this video and make your own decision. The key thing about this core manual is it's basically taking all the rules that we've seen so far in the previous Kickstarters or crowdfunding campaigns with At the Gates and The World Below, and they came from the RPG Anthology, and has sort of put them into a singular book for the moment. This book also has a lot of developer commentary and sort of behind the scenes rules that you might not know about if you aren't familiar with like how Onyx Path builds these games up from the ground up. And this is a continuation of their Storypath system that's used for Trinity Continuum, which is a sci-fi modern day type game with like pulp elements, sci-fi spacefaring stuff, and a variety of genres, including mythology, like ancient Greek mythology and that time period. And then you also have Scion, which is an urban mythology game akin to Percy Jackson, and then They Came From, which is more of a sort of campy meta contextual like parody of like different genres of movies. I guess you could say it's a parody, but sometimes you're just like going in with the tropes and like playing it straight. But in any case, the manuscript preview #1 dropped, which is the core rules. It has stuff like one of my favorite things, which I'm going to say, is it finally has what the different range bands for attacks and things are in terms of meters and squares for a battle map, which we didn't have before. Before, you sort of just had to make it up on your own, which felt a little daunting, but now you have guidelines. It's easier to incorporate into your games. There are a boatload of examples for various different things, such as how character creation should look, the investigation system, the influence system, and things of that nature. I'm not going to go into too much detail right now because things can be subject to change, but just know that there's a lot more detail in there than what you'd find in the At the Gates or the World Below books, but it's not so much detail that you need to have this book in order to play those games. This is just sort of like additional content as opposed to necessary content to play those games. Additionally, we have a thing about what elements of the game do change and what don't when you start modifying them. Basic stuff that doesn't change is stuff like the dice rolling mechanics. When you roll an 8 or better, that is always counts as a hit. If you roll 10, that's always going to count as 2 hits instead of 1. The difficulty is always going to be 1 through 5-ish, or like difficulty is always going to be reduced in order to succeed at a roll. Enhancement's always going to apply after a roll has at least 1 hit. And complications are things that are negative impact to the player on a die roll, but the initial like skill check can succeed or fail even if the complication isn't bought off. So that's the type of thing, like I lockpick a door, but if I don't buy off the complication, I might break the lockpick. The door might still open, but now I'm down a lockpick. Now, and tricks and advantage all work basically the same across the board. Skills and attributes, the skill and attribute list is not going to change across games, even though people have said, well, what about a sci-fi setting versus a high fantasy setting? Esoterica is a skill that I think they mentioned before. I didn't go into detail about that in this manuscript, but just know that like super science and occult knowledge are sort of like grouped together in the same space. If you want to add an extra skill or something, I don't think that's going to be an issue, but that just know they try to do their best to incorporate all the skills that you'd ever need for a game. So we have the 1 major path and 2 minor paths is what you will always see in games, though some games will allow you to choose your major and minor paths while others may not. This is something like if you're playing a game where everyone is a specific type of creature or something, maybe you want all your players to use the same path just so that everyone has access to some sort of ability or something, or some shared history. How contacts work. Contacts are essentially an enhancement bonus to rolls depending on what purview your contact has. If your contact is a fence, they'll give you an enhancement bonus for maybe selling items or things of that nature. The action sequence is always going to be the same. So this is stuff like a simple action takes an action during combat. Your reflexive actions are free. Then there's other stuff like how long a turn is and things of that nature. There's the action adventure system, which is initiative, injuries, armor, combat, like attack actions and things of that nature. Your investigation and influence systems, which are things like finding evidence, attitudes, bonds, and resisting influence. And then the various equipment and weapon tags. When I say this stuff doesn't change, that doesn't mean you can't add more to it. It's just like the basic functionality doesn't change. Now, elements that sometimes change. The target number for a dice roll is normally 8, but it can be 7. There are various status and area effects that can change names depending on what you want to cover. For instance, if you want to have a anti-magic field, but you want to change it into something like an anti-technology field, you can do that, rename it, and have it have like a slightly different purview, but it still functions almost identically to the original one. There are various different types of healing. So this is like, oh, you have your nanobots, your healing spells, or your first aid kits. Specific equipment tags can also change, and the names can change. This was something I thought of with like there's a thing that's like exquisite for an equipment tag to make it so that you get a bonus to influence actions with it. That, I think, is a very interesting way of doing it, but maybe if I want to make it specific to, say, a formal event, I might say, oh, add this tag to your clothes, you're now wearing formal clothes, you get a +1 social interaction only during social events, or something like that. Specific path elements can change. This is stuff like edges, the edges that a path gives you access to. And then how much experience is accumulated and spent, although the results should be roughly equivalent between games. This is the type of stuff like, oh, if you have a shared goal, you get, like, everyone gets 1 XP when that shared goal is completed. Maybe you add in something like when an enemy is killed, you get its soul or something, which means you get an X amount of, you get some experience for that instead. Sort of equivalent to D&D XP or Skyrim XP or something, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going a little bit off the rails. Elements that aren't in every game, character powers, edges, antagonist qualities and powers, and then there are other building blocks that are going to be in the manuscript, not this week, but the week after, and I'll try and go over those when I have time for that. Now that was Manuscript 1. We'll go into Manuscript 2 in a sec. I'm going to just cut off here and remind you that you should like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. You got this far already. If you hit the like button, more people will see this video. Honestly, I checked my numbers, and like 20 likes, I get maybe like 100 views, but anything above like 40, I'm like, oh man, so many people saw my content and liked it. Anyway, so if you want to support the channel, it doesn't cost you anything, just hit the like button. Thank you. So we're talking about Manuscript Preview number 2 for Storypath Ultra. These are expansions which delve deeper into the various different systems and give you more rules or guidelines for how to modify the various mechanics in the game. So for instance, the first example that they have here is creating the paths, telling you that each path should offer 3 skills, how many attributes should be distributed across the various areas, how many skills should be given in that regard. And then you have stuff like what contacts can be for a player, and then you can have like some sort of special ability, and they talk about path-specific special abilities, major path special abilities, and things of that nature. They give a few example paths. The first one is a detective. The first one is a detective. The second one is diligentia, which are angels. diligent angels, and then you have the Scion of the Nectarjare, who are born one of the gods, and they're champions created with divine energy. So you have a little bit of a variety here. Next up, we have creating tricks, and there's something mentioned here in regards to creating discounted tricks. You should rarely discount a 3-hit trick to a 1-hit without serious consideration. This is stuff you might do if you want to make it feel more useful for using some of these tricks. It does talk about rebuilding tricks or reworking them for your game, building new tricks. It gives examples of what a hit. So you spend hits to activate tricks, and it gives examples of stuff like 1 hit that you spend could be an additional +1 enhancement to a character's next action. You might be able to do something akin to apply a status effect, which would be like 2 hits, and an area of effect might be 3 hits, and stuff of that nature. There's guidelines on saying, hey, you might want to eyeball this a little bit better because some abilities might be more powerful than you expect, or might be not as powerful as you expected. And then you can also use stuff that is not hits. For instance, you can use momentum or a game-specific resource like inspiration or something to purchase a trick. There are a few other example tricks. They've got stuff like freeze ray, nimble defense, obliterate, not there, stuff to make you hidden, stuff to do damage, and obliterate is like creating a giant area of effect around you. Next up, we have creating tags, which is stuff for like equipment, weapons, and armor. And there are again guidelines here about what benefits you can give to someone with tags. Things like +1 enhancement for defensive actions or attack actions, +1 enhancement, and access to additional tricks, reducing the cost of a normal trick by 1, increasing the cost of a specific trick that is used against the owner or wearer of the item. And then there are other things that are sort of like a little bit more special. There are example ones such as Arcane. It's a weapon tag, and it does a bit more damage because it's like an arcane magical weapon. Magical Resistant is an armor tag that basically protects you against attacks with the arcane tag. Nanotech is a +1 enhancement to resisting attacks that are sci-fi related. You have something like Snatch, where it gives you a trick to steal 1 item from your target, which is a very Final Fantasy Riku or Thief type ability. I said Riku because I really like Final Fantasy X, but in any case. Then you have stuff about creating edges here. So, if you're going to give someone a +1 enhancement, it can be more broad, but if you're giving a +2 enhancement, it should be more specific. Additionally, if you want to have more dots for things, or actually I might be reading it differently, but stuff like you allow the character to ignore a moderate or major complication might be a little bit more costly, or giving yourself a +1 advantage might be a lot more costly than just a normal +1 enhancement. Things of that nature. It does have example edges such as ambushing, which gives you a trick on your initiative actions in which you can go first over other people. I'm not going into too much detail about these abilities and I might be a little bit wrong on it, but I'm just giving you the brief overview. Fame is called out here. So if you're a celebrity, and it has 3 levels and a drawback. So once you get like more fame, like 2 or 3, you have a bit of a complication to avoid being noticed by people when you're trying to be stealthy. Then you have stuff like maneuverable, gives you another a trick on initiative, which means that you can move quickly during the initiative phase and stuff of that nature. You have things about creating powers. Unlike edges, powers are a variable bonus that occasionally add to the character's abilities. They are often activated in some way, typically by taking an action, rolling a dice pool, or spending a resource, rather than being a permanent modifier to your character like edges are. So these are your more active abilities versus your passive abilities. There's talk about the progressive power suite. It is in many ways the easiest to create. You build a 1-dot power, and then each subsequent dot improves on that power in some way. Think of it like a ladder that you get higher up in the ladder, the stronger you become. Then there are themed power suites where you make powers you like without worrying about building on what came before, so long as each power invokes a theme in some way. The downside of themed power suite is that some themes might not be broad enough to contain a large enough variety of distinct and interesting powers. Things of that nature. There's talk about resources versus rolling. When you decide that you want your player to roll for using this power as opposed to just spending a resource and having it go automatically. There are different effects that they give as examples for the different types of power options you might have, and they have varying increasing improvements. So like example might be like when you get up to like 4 dots of a power, you're going to give something like increase enhancement to +3, cause retaliatory damage, or create a new effect on top of the base effect, and stuff of that nature. The various power suite examples they give are stuff like nature spells with like poison barbs, healing touch, and being one with nature, a very druidic power source or set of abilities. Then there's one that's more like about supernatural persuasion called social control, where you have something like listen to me, which gives you advantage over a single target for a turn. But at the highest level, which is imposed order, you spend 3 psychic energy, which is a resource that you have in this game, apparently. In this particular game, because this is technically being written as if you were a GM who made their own system. And instead for this ability, you would essentially create the social code area of effect for the scene, and the player gets to determine what code of conduct is required by that area of effect. And then there's super speed, where you have stuff like being able to move faster than everyone else, but also to do like flurry of punches, where you get extra damage on your melee attack, and defying gravity, where you can basically run on surfaces that you normally wouldn't be able to run on because you're just moving that fast. There's rules to expand combat, including stuff about expanding your weapon and armor selection and doing different damage types, such as like poison, psychic, sonic damage. And then there's a few example weapons and armors where you have the Axe of Vengeance, which seems to be more fantasy focused. But then you have a laser pistol, a sniper rifle, chainmail, or mailed armor, whatever that means, reflect vest, and a ballistic suit. So you have the gambit of modern sci-fi and fantasy. Lastly, we have the maneuvers, but next up we have the maneuvers, where these are tricks used in combat. Unlike normal combat tricks, however, they are purchased with another resource besides hits and require certain prerequisites to perform. These can be situational team maneuvers, high-octane ones, which are impressive or powerful. These maneuvers require a point of momentum to be spent, and then there's specialized maneuvers where they can only be pulled off with someone with a particular resource or skill. They give some of the example maneuvers here, like Life in the Gutter, where a character purchasing this maneuver has the destroyed it must have the destroyed reputation status effect. You have reached the lowest point, and for the remainder of the scene, you gain an additional 1 point of armor. These abilities, these maneuvers, are a lot more likely to break the core mechanics of the game, or at least like defy them differently than, say, something like a power or trick. Normally, you have a thing like a focused attack, which is a team maneuver where you have to have positive bonds with people in order to do extra damage per hit that you spend on this action, and a variety of other ones that I'm not going to get into. We have expanded rules for investigations, stuff about leads and complications, different additional information on how maybe you want to run interrogation scenes, using contacts to help solve a mystery, and then additionally you have clue tags. clue tags determine what kind of clue the evidence is in question. They might also determine what key skill is needed to uncover the evidence. So you have things like an academic tag here. The evidence relates to information that isn't commonly known, so key skills might be culture or esoterica, and maybe you can even have a contact with the informant tag to help you get it. These are sort of the requirements to get certain types of clues. And that's something I could see writing down in the background as a GM, being like, yeah, if someone has this skill, they'll have access to it, but if they're just running around looking for it, they might not find it. And evidence is an optional thing. It's not a lead. A lead is what helps progress the plot forward. So the lead might be the players find the location of a drop-off for some criminal activity, but they don't know who is actually doing the criminal activity or who's behind it. That would be where the evidence comes in, where they are like, okay, we know where this location is. We're going to research who bought an Uber or something to go there recently. That'll help them find who it is or something like that. There are expansions to bonds, things about having a specific bond, such as having someone who is fated to be with you, someone who is a spouse or a lover, someone who is your nemesis. And these all have different things associated with them, such as what types of situations might present themselves so that you can activate that bond and get bonuses and things of that nature. These are all basically just ways to expand upon the core rules. It's interesting. I like to see this stuff. It also gives a little bit more guidance on how you might use Storypath Ultra, as opposed to use Storypath Ultra's existing systems and have your own sort of background stuff that you're doing to sort of expand upon it that maybe is not player facing, maybe is. Honestly, so far with Storypath Ultra's core manual, this feels more like a Dungeon Master's Guide than the Dungeon Master's Guide for D&D. With this, I could see myself definitely taking some of what's here and trying to apply it to my games. I want to make a new ability for my players. How do I go about doing that? How do I do homebrew stuff, which the Dungeon Master Guide doesn't do? And I'm kind of ranting here, but that's kind of why I left D&D, was stuff like there wasn't trap making rules in the DMG for D&D. There are rules in here for the Storypath Ultra Core Manual that allows me to make traps and things of that nature. That's what complications are. So it gives me a lot more guidance. So that's it for the first impressions. Please let me know what you think. What rules are you interested in seeing expanded on more? And if you have any questions, feel free to ask, not me, don't ask me, ask people on Onyx Path's Discord. I'll put a link in the description below for you, because the developers are very into talking to the public about how this game was designed, and you can help bring up issues that maybe the common player or game master might bring up and be able to have those discussions, and they'll be like, yeah, actually that does sound like something we might need to change. Honestly, a lot of people play Dungeons and Dragons, but I haven't seen as much hands-on interaction with the community from Wizards of the Coast than I have seen with Onyx Path Publishing. So thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry for the rambling. This is probably not going to be edited that well, but have a good one. Thank you for reaching this far. And if you reached this far, press the like button. You've earned it.